This is a good time. I don't know how time we all are on jumping in and all that. Greetings. My name is Kathy Bubb. I'm a certified Christian educator in this Presbyterian and am recently retired with my husband David, who was pastor at Mifflin Pres for 9 years. And so the last year and not quite a half, we've been enjoying traveling and doing some other things. We both do some pulpit supply and gotten back on a Presbyterian commission, so that keeps me busy as well. So I did a presentation at Presbyterian last month, I think, with this topic, Tools for Tough Talks. And Sheila was there and told on me. And so Tori invited me to be here today. So I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to share with you. I'm here this week, and I'm not here next week, and then I'm back the next week. Unless I get the email from Tori that says, never mind. One week was plenty. So I have a handout because all good talks need a handout. I'm sure you have a good recycling place here somewhere. But it helps to me kind of keep us focused and moving. And so I've got a couple of resources that I've used that I think are good books for those of you who like to read a lot. I Think You're Wrong, But I'm Listening by Sarah Stewart Holland and Beth Silvers. They also do the Pantsuit Politics podcast, if you're ever interested in listening to that. Also the book When We Ended Racism, which just occurred to me, I forgot to bring, and I have a quote from there. So that's okay. That's one that we did as a presbytery back in the late spring. And that's really from reading that book was what got me thinking about. Someone asked the questions, so what? So how do we use this? So that in our conversation, I thought, well, I think one of the tools that we can have moving forward is how do we talk about tough things. The book was particularly focused on racism, but I think there's a lot of generalities. And the last one is Seeking to Be Faithful. Is that a document that you have used really much at Covenant? Okay, great. Well, we'll introduce that. And I'll probably have copies made of that for next week. So really, we've got 4 parts to do. We'll see how far we get today. Just want to talk just briefly, let you reflect on why do tough talks seem tougher these days? Many of us grew up with you don't talk religion and politics. So we've always had a challenging relationship with difficult conversations, but it seems like they've gotten more difficult these days. So what do you think happened to healthy conflict? Healthy conflict, by that I mean things that are neither strident nor apathy, where you don't talk about things at all. What happened to healthy conflict, healthy conversation? What do you think has contributed to society's inability to have tough talks? Please.
I don't think we know our neighbors as much anymore, and we're more mobile.
Don't know our neighbors and are more mobile. Yeah, I think that's great. What else do you think has contributed? Yeah, Joel.
I think the consensus around everything, politics, religion, values, has thinned. And so, where conversations used to be about between neighbors around whatever it might be, if we just stick to politics, tax policy. Okay, that's a very easy, reasonable people can disagree about what tax rates are going. But now it's like entire identities are at stake. It's not just differences of opinion over policy. It's about your whole identity as a person. So I just feel like because there's less agreement about anything, the pitch has gotten so much stronger.
Thanks. Other thoughts?
I don't think we're always dealing with the same set of facts.
Okay. Not always deal with the same set of facts, in case you couldn't hear that.
Yes, I mean and maybe it's along the same lines of consensus. We're not seeing things the same way. So the premise of the argument is different for different people.
Yeah, for sure. Beth, did you have?
think we have lost the ability to think outside black and white. And we aren't able to get into, everything is this way or this way. The gray is too difficult, or we don't want the work it takes to pull things apart and find out what's behind things.
Thanks. Yes.
There's a number of people that use the internet and social media to like speak with anonymity. So they can feel open to say anything they want, knowing there will be really no personal repercussions. So I feel like that contributes to people kind of forgetting how to have conversations outside of that environment. So.
Yeah, and I think that comes back to neighbor and not knowing your neighbor and being willing to say the things you wouldn't say to the person that you knew. Yeah.
It's my perception that emotional regulation has become less and less of a value. For children, I think we've always, understood when children lost their temper or had temper tantrums. But maybe 25 years ago, when I was still working in Chillicothe, there was a phrase, I just went off when things became difficult. And to just go off meant to lose one's composure, to become emotional in a loud public way. And that was when I started noticing that phrase, and the people I associated with seemed to increasingly value this just going off in order to make their thing happen, to push what it was they wanted.
Yeah. And I think those are all, I'll set some of these back here in case other folks come. You can be my paper distributor for all these back.
Oh.
It's a very important responsibility. Great observations, thank you. I think one of the things that was helpful to me is acknowledging that there are people and systems that benefit from our discord. They benefit from our tension. They benefit from our fighting. They benefit from our disagreement. And so sometimes for me, it has been helpful in that acknowledgement to say, wait a minute, who is trying to pull my strings? Who is trying to get me to do what it is they want me to do rather than be who I know I need to be? So who are those players? Well, our political candidates benefit when we are like this, right? The language of mailers and TV ads is very much not based on, let's sit down and have a civil conversation. It's based on who can be louder, who can be nastier, and that gets us fired up. That gets us, the phrase Tori was using, we're gonna lose it because we're being stoked because they assume that will get them more money, that will get them more support, and they have seen sort of that's the way that plays out. Secondly, social media. The media benefits from us, right? They're going for the clicks. They're going for the advertisers who, hey, more people are listening to this news when you talk about this. So we're not going to talk about the subtleties of policy. We're going to talk about those things that will get people mad. Because when people are mad, they're more likely to give money and click on things and helps our revenue. And I swear it really isn't conspiracy theory. Foreign countries benefit from the United States being at unrest. Foreign countries benefit from us not willing to, when we are so busy fighting in ourselves and demonizing and calling evil, again, not about policies, it's about you as a person are a bad, evil person who we should get rid of. Who's sitting over there saying, yeah, you go. I as a country, as Russia, as China, as North Korea, as Iran, I can do what I want because you are totally distracted by these things. So there are foreign influences as well as within our own house that benefit. And so I think that's a complicated and more complicated world than we used to have. Because all of that comes out through social media.
Well, certainly the foreign countries are causing that too.
Well, certainly. And they are making use of, yes, the foreign countries are making use of the social media to, as you said earlier, we have a different set of facts. And so all of those things go together to make this such a volatile time. And yet, we still are called to love our neighbor. And we still want to be able to sit down at Thanksgiving dinner coming up and not feel like the roof might blow off. So how are we going to do that? I think the other piece, and this is sort of, we've hinted at this, the issue is we feel like this is appropriate, I think, after yesterday's football games, or today's football games, or all the football games. We have our team. We have our tribe, right? And I always go green. No matter what Team Green says, I have all the hats and the coats and the jackets and the pennants that are for Team Green, and I'm going to be Team Green. They did what? Oh, I'm still Team Green. They did what? No, I'm still Team Green. And so part of our call, I believe, and this was out of one of the books, their phrase they used a lot, is to take off our jerseys, to not feel compelled to stick with what our team has said, no matter what they say, to be willing to take off the jersey and say, you know what? Yeah, I'm pretty sure as a Christ follower, I'm called to do something different. And so taking off our jerseys, I think, being willing to step out of our tribe. And the other that we also hinted at, this whole winner-loser mentality. My team's going to win. Well, but is this for the common good? Can't we look, rather than winner-loser, can't we talk about common good? So those are some of the background. So one of the things I want to talk about is I think there's 3 steps to being 3 tools to have towards dealing with tough talks. The first one is preparing ourselves. The second is preparing, being in that conversation with the other. And really the last one, take from Kenny Rogers, is to know when to hold them and know when to fold them, know when to walk away and know when to run, And so that'll be one of the last things we do. Well, actually, and then we're going to look at the Seeking to Be Faithful document, because that helps take it out of us as individuals to a church. How can a church better prepare itself? That's really what this is about. This is about preparing ourselves, being mindful of how, when we're going to be in a situation, a conversation, we can be our best selves to do that. So I've just got a few of the things on here. The first one is not anything you don't know. The only thing you can control is yourself. You can't control how your child, your grandchild, your neighbor, your cousin, your crazy uncle, you can't control how they are going to be. All you can control is yourself. And so being the best self you can be, I think, is what we want to be doing. So what does that really mean? Is being grace-filled. Being grace-filled. So what are things we do to be grace-filled?
Listen.
We listen.
Attentively.
Listen attentively, for sure. What else do we do to be grace-filled? If we're trying to fill ourselves with grace before we have interactions, what do we do?
Yeah.
Give. Okay.
Right.
Pray. Breathe.
Talk kindly to myself.
Okay.
If I don't have a kind self-talk towards the internal dialogue, it's just going to be cruel on the way out too.
Nice. Yeah. Yes.
Also trying to this is really hard to do because you're only yourself. I mean, you can't be the other person. But think about it from their point of view, of their lived experiences, how they may be different from yours, and that you're not always right, because I always like to think that I'm right.
Yeah.
Honestly.
For sure.
I think that I'm right. But
Yes,
when I start thinking about, maybe I'm not.
Yeah.
Based on what I'm hearing them say, and if I was in their shoes, would I have a different view?
Yes, and that's great, and we're gonna come back to that even more. I love that. I love that. Yeah. Yeah.
Try to be a non-anxious presence. You don't bring your issues to the conversation.
Yeah, and I think all those great suggestions and ideas. I mean, being grace-filled. My dad liked to use a phrase that was part of a, I think, the Book of Word a long time ago. To make diligent, that Presbyterians are called to make diligent use of the means of grace. Ring a bell for anybody. And what are those means of grace? Worship, study, prayer, service, giving, community. We need to make sure that's what we're feeding ourselves to be grace-filled. We need to receive God's grace before we can give it out. And so making sure that we're keeping track of those things, those opportunities, to make diligent use of the means of grace. And so many scriptures we could use. The one I put here, Ephesians 4. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ God forgave you. Again, breathing in that grace. Another thing they talked about is examining your why. You may have seen TED Talks on that. Simon Sinek, thank you. Examine your why. Why do these issues, why does this issue matter to you? Think about something that you get hot about, that you posted on social media about, that you've had to fight with somebody about. Why is it important to you? Because I think it really can be helpful as we identify our why. Then, as was already mentioned, it's going to help us have dialogue with somebody else, because then we'll want to get to know their why as well. Because sometimes that can be a good place for us to start, is as we identify our why. We are often driven by fear and anger in our positions. So if we can reflect more, why is this important to me based on my values? It can, for us, take out our fear and rage and escalation and help us to be our best selves as we present, when we really focus on that and examine our why. Yeah, please, thoughts on that?
Now, I just heard, and then you may get to this later, that when you're in discussion with someone, it's often helpful to tell a story that's a personal thing rather than facts, because that's why it does matter to me that I believe this rather than I heard or I know. So my why is often how I have come to believe this through my personal experience.
100%, exactly, because you may have read the things that say, if there's someone with whom you disagree about a particular topic, throwing statistics at them makes very little difference. Often, what can move the needle is, this is my story, this is me, this is why it's personal to me. Because it's much more challenging to argue with someone's personal experience. I can't say, well, no, you didn't have that interaction in the supermarket. Well, you did. You did. And so, but you've got to be able to articulate that why first. Right? You've got to be able to say that for yourself. The next one that we've got here is be clear on assertions versus assessments. And this is where, David, I forgot the book, so you've got to help me out here. In the book that we used in the Presbyterian book club group, When We Ended Racism, a really provocative book, great title, When We Ended Racism. Their focus is, when you look ahead 50 years, what was it that we did now that ended racism? So it's a very, very good and challenging book. But one of the things that the author challenges us to do is to be mindful of assertions versus assessments. Now, I'm going to be super clear here in that I get confused regularly on how he used those words. So I'm going to use the words the way he used them. Feel free to put in different words, because continually throughout the reading, so is this an assertion or an assessment? I don't know. So I'm going to give you his definitions, for his and her, I should say, because it's both Justin Michael Williams and Shelley Tygielski. So their definitions. So assertions again, it's back to how I think it, are based on facts. I know, assertion, I'm asserting the truth of this, that's kind of how I try. So it's 50 degrees outside. That's, the assertion is, that's what it is, it's 50 degrees outside. My assessment is, that's cold. Right? So the fact that it's 50 degrees, okay, to me it's cold. To someone who always lives, in northern Canada, that's quite warm, 50 degrees, right? So we need to be mindful, and again, this is the self, this is the inner work that needs to be done. What are the things that really are fact, and what are the things that we assume are fact, but really aren't, but really are open to interpretation? And the author says you'll be surprised how many of the things that you go with, the sort of your go-to conclusions, really are the assumptions, things that you, assessments. See, I already can't get these right, so I'm going to put back here. The assessment. They're subjective stories that we create, assessments. Like I said, his language. But we need to be grounded. And part of the problem is most of us here probably live in echo chambers. I'm sure you've heard that phrase before. We are always hearing the same thing from the same people, and therefore, that's what we believe now to be true, because we're hearing the same things all the time. And so we need to be able to step back and say, okay, but what really are the facts? What is the information from which I am basing my assessment? What are the assertions? What are the facts versus how I always interpret them? Does that make any sense? He had a beautiful paragraph you would have loved if I remember to bring the book and read it to you. David, do you have any observations to add on that?
No, pretty much he liked 2 A words, and so that's why.
Assertions and assessments.
Yeah, facts versus conclusions, basically.
Yeah.
That are may or not
Please.
fact.
Yeah.
Theory.
Yeah.
There's misunderstandings and there's incomplete understandings, and how can we know that about another person? But one way I think it kind of relates to this is judging other people's outers by my innards.
Nice.
I don't,
Judging other people's outers by my innards. Yeah.
Assessment to judge them and not facts, not assertions. But I don't like the other way.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Yeah. And again, it's something that we do, and that would be something to be mindful, of yourself in the next couple of days. What are the things that you have convinced yourself are the facts, that it's 65, or are you in that's cold? No, to you it's not cold, that's warm. But how can you think that? Well, because 65 is a fact. I am interpreting for myself how that is, and so it can be helpful when we acknowledge that in our own way of looking at things. Other thoughts on that? Yeah, Joel,
There's
please.
just one observation I've noticed in hard conversations I've had recently. The assessment of who is yelling is very, very different. And I noticed where I thought that person was yelling. They weren't. Well, I mean, again, I guess it depends on whose assessment it is. But I know for me, I often mistake a raised emotional or an intense emotional tenor for yelling. And if you're the person who has the intense emotional tenor and you're not raising your voice in any significant way to be accused of yelling is doesn't make it better.
Yeah.
How's that? So,
No, thank you. I think that's a good example of, yes, your assessment is that person is angry, whereas the fact is they weren't.
Or they are, but yelling is nobody likes to be yelled at, so it's an accusation we throw out to dismiss someone who's potentially just having an important but serious, passionate conversation. And the moment yelling is brought in, it can be a way to now I don't have to listen to you.
Yes, thank you. Yeah. Corey?
Just to Joel's point, which certainly connects with what you're saying. My daughter, Emma, many of you know who she is, says that as a parent, when she was a teenager, I would whisper shout at her. And that had a lot to do with the emotional intensity. And then also in my role as a school counselor, sometimes parents would come to me and say, my child doesn't like their teacher. They say she yells all the time. And so I came to understand sometimes someone is yelling at us in terms of emotional intensity and raised volume, but then sometimes somebody feels yelled at. And I guess because I value my relationship with my children, if they're feeling yelled at, I'm willing to take a look at what is it about my face, my volume, my body posture that's causing my loved one, who I truly do love with all my heart, to feel yelled at. And if I love the person, it's easier for me to make that judgment and to like bring it on down, that intensity. So I don't know.
Right.
That is a story of my lived experience with my loved one. In case that would benefit anybody else, I'm willing to look at what's making the person feel yelled at.
That's really helpful. And that really in some ways comes back to the anonymity that you mentioned before about Facebook. You don't see faces. You don't hear, all you're doing is reading. Whereas if I'm having a conversation with you and you're doing this, I can see, the way I'm presenting this is offensive or is bothering you, is troubling you. And I can change, if my goal is not to trouble you, I can change.
You're trying to get along and plan a big event.
Right, I can change that. But when it's worse anonymous, but even at all online, we don't have that chance to read the body to know what it is. Yeah, thanks, Dave.
And say this goes back to when you grow up in family systems, in community systems, north-south systems, even different countries that have an assumption of volume levels. And so part of it for me is I need to understand, is that person really angry or that's just the way they talk? In the same way, I have to be careful myself if I'm getting passionate or whatever, how am I being perceived? So it's both understanding that we don't all have the same assumptions about what constitutes inappropriate or elevated stress tension levels.
Yeah, thanks.
On top of that, my families are totally different. My mom's side of the family is German, so they're like, that's the way it is. That's the way it is. And my dad's family, they're like talking all the time, okay, you do it. And so like navigating between those two like family cultures has been helpful, but it can be really jarring for us if we're in a different, like how do you adapt to that different situation? And so I'm just trying to like listen to see what the environment is and maybe understand that people have different ways of expressing things culturally.
Absolutely. And actually, you all have led me beautifully into the next one, which is to own your emotions. And again, this is all still this inner work, is how knowing how you feel about something. And a couple quotes I love out of these two books. We must become people who don't mistake our opinions for facts. And we are emotional beings who on occasion think. And so I think that, again, I think that says so much to us. I had it, the other thing, Sheila will know this, and this is the only one I had left, and you can't even see it. It's so small. It's colorful though, you can tell that. This is a feelings wheel. And I don't know, this may be something that Tori's familiar with.
I've seen it.
But you can do a whole session on feelings and identifying your feelings. But it can be helpful for other people, but also for yourself. When you're mad about something, I'm just mad. Well, what might mad be? So if you look as you look on the circle, which of course you can all read from there, I can't even read it from here. If you look at the circle here, under mad, well, is mad really uncomfortable, anxious, insecure, disappointed? What is your mad really? And it gives you all these different words on the outside for your basic middle emotions of scared, happy, fearful. You know, what else could that really be? And so getting in touch with, this makes me so mad, but why? What's the mad part? Is it fear? And if it's fear of what? Fear of loss, fear of control? Do you feel disrespected? What is it? And so these little wheels. So if you're interested in this, what works really well is if you take a picture of it with your phone, and then on your phone you can do this and blow it up so you can
If
read
you'll
it.
send that to me digitally, if you haven't already, I will make copies and
Okay.
have those available for anybody who
Nice.
wants them, because this is so cool.
Yeah,
I love
it's lovely. And the other thing you can do, I mean, you can also start at the outside and go in and say, I'm feeling really, unsettled. What's that based in? And then you can get down to what is the base emotion of that. So getting in touch with your own feelings. I want to share a quote out of a book by John Pavlovich, and I've lost the title, but I just think this is stuck with me. We human beings tend to be emotionally lazy. We're prone to take the feelings of least resistance. As we move through the day and as people cross our paths, we usually settle for whatever thought immediately comes to mind, the ones that don't take much work, the knee-jerk responses they trigger in us upon contact, whether this is affection or contempt. As a result, we usually don't spend much time concerning ourselves with those who disagree with us, their complexity, their backstories, or internal conditions. Again, it's just we have emotionally. So being in touch, again, why is this important to us? What is it really saying in our emotions? And then really these last two, really both being humble is so important in our own mind. And you referred to that earlier. Maybe there is something for me to learn. Maybe I don't understand every nuance of this. You must always be willing to truly consider evidence that contradicts your beliefs and admit the possibility you may be wrong. Intelligence isn't knowing everything, it's the ability to challenge everything you know. And so again, I think we have got to go in, and I'm going to be first admit that's really hard because there's some topics I know I'm right. I know it. There's no room for anything here. So I got to work on that sometimes. That humility, that willingness to be open. Yeah, David.
I don't know if any of you watch The Irrational. Now they're retired, watch these TV shows. It's a psychologist who, like every profession in TV world, solves crimes. But he's always talking about, from a psychological perspective, one of the big things is confirmation bias. And sometimes he'll show stuff like, my gosh, that was so obvious, and yet I didn't see it myself. And so being aware that we do this with Bible interpretation, theology. We see the things that reinforce our perspective and don't see the things or discard the things that contradict that. Or in our today's culture and climate, those things are hidden from us. So all of that should lead us to be more humble.
Exactly, and being willing to make the changes. A simple, timely example, for Halloween, I had been in the past, a person who was slightly indignant when someone rang the doorbell and then just stood there. I would like my trick or treat, I would like to hear trick or treat, please. I mean, I think and I want my please and thank you when I gave the candy out. I'm not like I didn't give or anything, I was just a little miffed about it. And then someone had an actually valuable Facebook post, which is a rarity. But they said, you don't know anything about this child who's coming to your door. You don't know where they come from. You don't know their situation. Maybe it took every inch of courage that they had to come to your door. Maybe they're there, they had a chance to go with friends to be hooligans somewhere and they said, no, I'm gonna go get free candy instead. Wouldn't you rather have them there? You don't know. So just give the candy, or if you're gonna feel bad about it, don't give candy at all. But don't put your expectations of what they're, and it was like, so it was, I'd like to think it was in part the humility that let me say, yeah, oh, rather than no, I'm gonna double down on my trick or treat demand. You know, so being willing to listen, being willing to say, I can change. And that's a question to ask yourself. When is the last time you changed your mind about something? When is the last time you were persuaded into something different? And if you can't think of a thing forever, you might do some of this self-examination to say, maybe I need to be, again, out of my silo, so I am hearing other perspectives, because if all you're hearing is reinforcing what you already think, there isn't a way that you're not on your own gonna suddenly, hey, I have this light bulb, but maybe this child coming to my door is neurodivergent or has other issues going on. I'm not gonna come to that by myself. I'm gonna come to that because I've listened to other people. I've been in community, as we come back to what we said earlier. I talk to my neighbors. I'm open to learning new things.
Be curious.
Being curious, absolutely. And that kind of leads us, we'll touch on this, the turning outward, because I've said the seventh thing on there over and over again. Commit to being your best self, you know? Commit to being your best self when you go into conversations, right? Now, some conversations are thrust upon you, right? And we'll talk a little bit more, probably in 2 weeks, about how to best have good conversations. Or maybe we'll get to it now. I don't know. We'll see what we do. All right, so turning outward. So this is all your inner prep. Now you're ready to have the conversations. You've got grace, and now you want to give grace, right? So many of the things we've already talked about here. You want to be listening. You want to be kind. You want to, the basics of using the body language, I'm not going to stand like this as Joel's talking to me. I'm going to be the inviting person as I listen. We're going to give grace. We're going to assume, and this is hard, particularly in some areas, we're not going to assume the worst about the other person, right? We're not going to assume that they're evil people. We're not going to assume that they're out to destroy society, right? We're going to give grace. You are talking to another beloved child of God in every conversation you have. And we've got to start with that. We've got to get away from the demonizing, the evil, the subverting America. They're a beloved child of God. And so we need to give that grace that we have been filled with, that we have received, and give that to other people. So actually, I thought I'd get to this next week, but we'll do it right now. So other things from your life experiences, you're going to have a difficult conversation. What are other tools that you've learned? What are the things you need to know? If you're going to have a good conversation with somebody, you filled yourself with grace, you're ready to, so I mentioned one, body language, posture. We want to look like we're open and have a smile. What are other basic tips for difficult conversations? Yes. Oh, that's okay.
Time. I think that's a big issue because when we're rushed, we don't have the space to listen to the other person. And taking the time can be hard.
Absolutely. 100%. Time and place. Time and place are so key. If you have an issue with me, it's not going to be good to do that at 5 till 10, right? On the way out the door. Hey, by the way, Kathy, I wanted to tell you, I'm not ready for it. There's no time to really do it, right? So being conscious of the time and place, and being willing to say, if someone comes to you and says, hey, I really, I'm upset by the yard sign that you have in your yard. Can we talk about it? You also need to be the one that says, you know what? I've only got 5 minutes. When can we do that? I'd love to have that conversation. Can we do that at X time, right? Picking the right time and place for both people is super important. Using your I statements. I feel, and you know how that goes, right? It can't be, I feel that you always say. That doesn't count as an I feel statement. We'll get our little graphs back out. I feel one of these words. I feel disrespected. I feel upset. I feel angry. I feel, right? It owns it. You own it for yourself. Not, I feel that you are a stupid. No, that doesn't count as an I feel statement. As much as we want to use it that way, it doesn't. Other tips, just for interaction, Joel.
I think part of like the way that I can expect to be my best self is recognizing that you're not going to be your best self.
Yes.
Not as an excuse for bad behavior. It's just I can have my best intentions and go in, and things just don't go the way you want them to. And so being able to not just beforehand, but in the middle and afterwards, find that grace, apologize well when you need to. Sometimes I think like the best way to handle it, like if we can become good apologizers, just goes a long way. There's a way that can be overdone too, and I've certainly, where you feel like you're the only one ever apologizing. Okay, and that may be manipulative by others, but in the end, I'd still rather be that person.
Nice. Thank you.
Right.
Yeah, please.
I have found it sometimes helpful when I'm with a person that I know we are just seemingly opposite as in every area, that if they say something that I find to be just wrong, because I'm right, that they're wrong or whatever, is just keep saying, tell me more about that. Tell me more, because eventually, I think I usually can get to a point where there is some commonality in our views.
Right.
And if I don't keep at, tell me more, say something again, help me understand, eventually they kind of do help me understand.
Yeah.
And doesn't mean that I necessarily changed my initial viewpoint, but at least I have a better understanding of where they're coming from. That if I don't keep at that, I never get to that point.
Right. Thank you for that. And that's where we're going to pick up. It falls right into our Be Curious, which we'll pick up in 2 weeks. I do want to end with a slightly different thought. Dave and I went last night to hear Jim Wallace. He was here in Columbus at Trinity Episcopal. Jim Wallace, Reverend Jim Wallace, I'm sure many of you know, big in social justice issues, Sojourners magazine, and he's been traveling around. He has a recent book, False White Gospel, which is another excellent book to read. But there was a panel that was talking about hope. The focus was on Christian nationalism, but it quickly got just to the issue of how do we have hope. And first, we'll read something that was actually in Presbyterian Outlook, their webpage this week. Regardless of this election's outcome, because we got kind of a big deal coming up on Tuesday, Christians have, I can't read my own writing. Christians have our work cut out for us as we find more ways to live faithfully and heal political divides, no matter what the result is, right? Our work is still here. And so on this issue of hope with these panelists, they talked about hope as a duty and obligation, a discipline, something we practice. And they told the story, the setting doesn't matter, but they asked the person who was kind of by themselves in this environment, do you think what you will do will change anything? And they said, I do this to remain faithful so that I don't change. And so I think we're thinking about where we go after Tuesday, right? That we, as a people of faith, we need to have hope as a discipline, as a spiritual practice. Jesus has been Lord at the beginning. He will be Lord at the end. Even now, he is Lord, right? And we, as Christians, as followers of Christ, no matter what happens in the election, we need to love our neighbor. No matter what happens, we need to be kind. No matter what happens, we need to share. No matter what happens. And so that first Timothy passage I'll leave you with, always be prepared to give an account for the hope that is within you, right? No matter what happens on Tuesday. Yeah. So, thank you. We'll talk more next week about turning outward and know when to hold, know when to fold, know when to walk away. Because again, it's not like, oh, Tuesday, this is all done. Everyone's gonna love each other and divisions will heal, right?
Yes.
So these are tools that are important for us as we move throughout our lives. So,
Thank you.
thank you so much.